All right, David, we're all live. We're recording? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gene Jones. I'm with the Southern Waste Information Exchange, and welcome to PFAS Forum 4. I'm going to save my introductory comments until tomorrow morning so that we can get right in with our program here this afternoon. But I will ask everybody to do one thing. Please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Welcome, virtual attendees. We've got right at 270 folks attending the forum this year. So each year we keep getting a little bit more folks as the interest grows in this whole area. And I think over the next day and a half, there's going to be a lot of discussion of what's going on within the industry, what's going on with regulations, and what's going on the remediation side. And hopefully folks will take some information home and learn from not only the education that happens, but the networking that goes on in the exhibit hall. We're going to go ahead and kick this session off. This is our pre-conference workshop, and Michael Goldstein with the Goldstein Environmental Law Firm is going to kick us off with this. This particular session is on PFAS and environmental justice. And I think Michael, just knowing him the way I do over the last 20-some years, is going to put together a great session for you to really set the stage for the forum itself. So without any further introduction, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir. Thank you.
Gene, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PFAS 4. Welcome to the conference. It's wonderful to be back with everyone. Another year has gone by. We're a year older. We're a year wiser. We know a year's more of information about PFAS. There's a lot to talk about. I'm really excited about this panel. I believe it's the only panel during the whole conference where we will be at least tipping our hat in the direction of public health. And it's certainly the only panel where we will be talking about environmental justice. And as a bonus, it is the only panel where we will be talking, I believe, about environmental insurance. And for those of you who know me, most of what I do every day is in the redevelopment arena. We do a lot of cleanup work, obviously, a lot of contamination cleanup work. We work with our friends and allies at the state and in the local pollution control programs, but we do a tremendous amount of environmental redevelopment. So there is a bias here in the thesis that I'm going to advance from an environmental justice perspective in favor of redevelopment, and you simply can't talk about redevelopment without talking about environmental insurance, certainly not in a PFAS context. And part of the thesis that I'm going to advance as part of this discussion, which hopefully will evolve over the year and into next year's conference and beyond, into a dialogue, a larger dialogue with an action plan. The opportunity to make significant progress on the environmental justice front involves, the greatest opportunity involves not just leveraging all of the money that will be thrown at this problem at the federal level and at the state level, and with all of the state action plans and the local action plans and the federal action plans, but bringing private capital off the sidelines into the fight. And in order to allow that to happen, for private capital to come off the sidelines into the fight through the vehicle of redevelopment, we're going to need environmental insurance. So there's a third element to this panel that you're now sitting in on that will explore the realm of environmental insurance related to PFAS. There's a lot of folklore out there about the environmental insurance markets pulling up stakes and fleeing from this risk. That is not the case. We spent a lot of time in our pre-conference workshop last year talking about transactional opportunities in the face of this great challenge. But what I think you will see when Edwin Baez from Beazley speaks to us, that's simply not the case. So with all of that as context, I want to take 3 steps back and give you a roadmap for this 2-hour discussion, and we're going to have plenty of time, I believe, for questions and answer and dialogue and agenda setting for what will happen over the next 12 months as a group, as a community, until we come back together. I'm going to provide a little bit of the fundamentals on environmental justice. I don't want to presume that everyone is steeped in this arena. We're going to move quickly from environmental justice to some of the public health implications of PFAS, and then we're going to get into what the federal government is doing, some of the federal agencies, EPA obviously, but also the Department of Defense, interestingly, and then we're going to go into an agenda for Florida, a PFAS environmental justice action plan for Florida. What you will quickly see is that the action plan is aspirational because right now the state of Florida doesn't formally have any aspect of environmental justice as part of its PFAS action plan. Hopefully, as a community, we can work with our good friends at FDEP to change that, and with some of the sister agencies at the state level. After we go through that discussion and think about what a Florida action plan for environmental justice at PFAS sites should look like, we're going to go up the Atlantic seaboard and we're going to stop off in New York. We have a guest speaker. First time to this conference, I literally roped him in the last 24 hours, and he was gracious enough to participate. Dr. Fábio Iwashita is with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. He is a Ph.D. He has a tremendous amount of experience in research and in geology and in environmental justice. His current work at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation includes investigating the contamination of soil, rivers, and groundwater by chemical compounds like PCBs, like PFAS. He is also, and this is very germane to today's conversation and very exciting for me, and I'm sure for the rest of us, he is the division's diversity officer and liaison with the indigenous nations, and his work supports the development and updating of the state's environmental justice and disadvantaged communities policies. That's going to be a great perspective for us. It's rare at this conference that we've heard anything about New York, and now we have an expert speaking on behalf of the state and right on point to what the state is doing with respect to environmental justice and PFAS. And then our good friend who has been here many times before, Edwin Baez with Beazley. He's a senior environmental underwriter. Edwin has saved more deals than I have fingers and toes, at least for me personally. He is a great friend to environmental redevelopment in Florida and a great resource. And what's wonderful about Edwin is that he sticks. That's what you want in your environmental insurance. You don't want it to go away. You don't want your underwriter to flee at the first sign of a challenge. It reminds me of this great Seinfeld episode, the one where Jerry shows up at a car rental agency to rent a car, and they tell him, "I'm sorry, we don't have your reservation." And Jerry says, "Well, the thing about the reservation is not the making of the reservation, it's the keeping of the reservation." Now, I don't tell the joke as well as Jerry does, but the larger point is this, that you want your environmental insurance to be around when you need it, and especially in this context where, on the face of it, the risks are quite significant. So, all of that having been said, let's get into the presentation. Do we have an IT person here? Thank you. What am I doing wrong? All right, here we go. Operator error. All right. We're going to start and run through very, very quickly some environmental justice fundamentals so that we're all on the same page. This is a definition that you see throughout the federal government and in most states that have tackled environmental justice. You find this definition in a number of executive orders, which we'll get into in a second, signed by various presidents of the United States, and in a number of regulatory guidance documents and directives. Environmental justice means the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability, in agency decision-making and other federal activities that affect human health and the environment, so that people are, one, fully protected from disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects and hazards, including those related to climate change, the cumulative impacts of environmental and other burdens, and the legacy of racism or other structural or systemic barriers. We have all of these issues in play when we talk about PFAS. We'll go through that in a very objective and systemic way. And two, have equitable access to a healthy, sustainable, and resilient environment in which to live, play, work, learn, grow, worship, and engage in cultural and subsistence practices. For those of you who have heard me speak over the years, you know that I love guidance documents, and I try and bring to these types of meetings the latest, greatest, issued by whatever agency we're talking about. Last year, the EPA Office of General Counsel issued a phenomenal guidance document. It's hundreds of pages long. It is Environmental Justice 101 through a Ph.D. level course, EPA Legal Tools to Advance Environmental Justice. Among other things, it has a wonderful EJ lexicon with the various terms that you'll hear in this presentation and beyond if you're involved in this area, in this arena. I'm not going to go through each definition here in the interest of time, but terms that we want you to keep in mind as you listen to this discussion, think about questions to ask the panel, dialogue to engage us with, and what our action agenda could look like in the ensuing months and years: disproportionate impacts, equity, fair treatment, meaningful involvement, and most critically and of greatest relevance for this discussion, a very helpful definition of underserved communities. A short while ago, I mentioned that there have been some executive orders in this arena signed by various presidents. The first executive order on point was signed by President Clinton in 1994, 12/8/98. It's the granddaddy of executive orders in the environmental justice arena, and it directed federal agencies to develop EJ strategies to help federal agencies address disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of their programs on minority and low-income populations. And then President Biden has signed 2 executive orders, the most recent of which was in April of 2023. That's 14/096. I'm not going to talk about the third one. It's up there on the screen. But I mentioned this second one because we are going to see, as we go through this presentation, this particular executive order in effect. And I say that not just to be a completist, but because when you leave this conference and you go into your communities and back to your constituencies or your clients or your colleagues, and you're looking for resources to help and agency partners to help, I want you to think about this next concept, because the executive order established an ethic to pursue a whole of government approach to environmental justice and investing in and supporting culturally vibrant, sustainable, and resilient communities in which every person has safe, clean, and affordable options for housing, energy, and transportation. And the concept here that I want to emphasize and the opportunity is a whole of government approach. We see this in the next slide, actually. This is EPA's 2002-2026 EPA Strategic Plan framework that was released last year And what you will see is that there are 4 main strategies here. I'm not going to read them out loud. Each strategy has 7 goals. And doing a little rough justice here, at least 7 of these goals and all of these strategies have an EJ component, and they all have an EJ component with applicability to the agency's response to PFAS from an EJ perspective. I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a toxicologist, but as an environmental lawyer, working with local governments, working with affected stakeholders, working with developers, working in EJ communities, my office spends a lot of time thinking about dealing with public health. And of all of the research that I performed to prepare this presentation, I was struck most by the work done by several researchers reflected in this slide, including, you can't really see them, but we're going to talk about them at great length. These folks down here from the Silent Spring Institute, from the Harvard T.H. Chen School of Public Health, and from a few other organizations. This discussion of the public health implications of PFAS and its the way it's disproportionately felt in EJ communities, I have to tell you, was somewhere between depressing and disgusting. And it really drove home the challenge to us as an industry, and the opportunity as an industry to bring resources and assistance to people who are in desperate need of it. I encourage everyone to download and listen to, you can do this, Michael. There we go. The 2-hour presentation on the presentation titled PFAS, Sociodemographic Factors and Implications for Communities and Environmental Justice. And if you don't have 2 hours to listen to it, then what I would do is I would fast forward and listen to this discussion from Dr. Shader with the Silent Spring Institute. It is worth your time. Let's now get into the objective demonstration from coast to coast of the disparate impacts felt in environmental justice communities of PFAS contamination in surface water, in drinking water, in soil, and air. The concept of poverty, class, and disparate health impacts is not new. This unfortunate relationship has been studied and documented for quite some time. The report that I have up on the screen here is from the NRDC with a couple of other partners. It was issued back in, I believe, 2019. My eyes are not that good. And what it does is it starts to look at the way in which the purported protections under the Safe Water Drinking Act, signed in 1974 by President Ford, have or have not been successfully implemented. And the conclusions that are documented in this report are simply that the law has not been equally enforced for everyone. People of color, low-income people, non-native English speakers who are exposed to disparate percentages of industrial permitting and industrial facilities, all suffer from inadequate enforcement and increased exposure. And this report, which looks just at the Clean Water Act, and it's not PFAS specific, is actually building on a number of earlier studies looking at environmental justice and drinking water contamination that go back to 2011. The first study that I could find that looks at the relationship between PFAS in drinking water and environmental justice communities was published in 2021, August of 2021, also by the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, with a number of other local not-for-profit partners, titled Dirty Water, Toxic Forever, PFAS Chemicals Are Prevalent in the Drinking Water of Environmental Justice Communities. And what this report did is it documented that, no surprise, PFAS pollution is more intense in California communities already overburdened by multiple sources of pollution and by other factors that make them more sensitive to pollution, putting those vulnerable communities at greater risk of harm from PFAS exposure. At least 69% of state-identified disadvantaged communities have PFAS community in their public water systems. Almost a quarter of these communities face the highest levels of PFAS contamination in the state of California. NRDC also noted, and this is true in a number of the states that we looked at, that communication of relevant test results and potential exposure risks to communities fell short. They recommended comprehensive action to address the state's widespread PFAS pollution, including expanded monitoring, immediate support for and access to clean water for the most vulnerable communities, broad regulation and cleanup at the state level of PFAS-contaminated water, safe disposal requirements for PFAS waste, restriction of PFAS use, and accountability for polluters for the cost and damages associated with PFAS. Just a quick sidebar about that. What we see, or what I saw as I prepared this presentation, is that, and this is no surprise, from an agency perspective, there's a strong bias for enforcement, a strong bias towards enforcement as a cure, and there's little discussion about utilizing incentives that have worked so well for redevelopment generally, brownfields redevelopment generally, to bring private capital to the fight, as I've mentioned before, because it's going to take both public resources and private resources to address all of the risk and need in EJ communities. The next few slides goes deep into the report. I'm not going to read all of the statistics that I pulled out of the report that go with each figure, but I am going to read some because I think they're interesting. California law at the time required California EPA or Cal EPA to identify disadvantaged communities based on geographic, socioeconomic, public health, and environmental hazard criteria. The analysis was conducted with data from software called CalScreen 3.0, which generates a specific score for communities, a CES score. By the way, we need that in Florida. We don't have it. By incorporating CES scores into the analysis, the researchers examined the interaction between PFAS pollution and communities already burdened by other forms of pollution, like air and pesticide use, and socioeconomic and health factors like poverty and cardiovascular disease. The pollution levels were then overlaid with the CES scores to determine levels of overlap, and this figure 5, which I have up on the screen, identifies those census tracts that face the most disproportionate pollution and socioeconomic burdens, as well as higher potential exposure to PFAS-contaminated water. The percentage of more vulnerable communities, as captured by high CES scores, with the highest levels of PFAS pollution reveals that these communities have either not been tested for PFAS, those marked in gray, or have very high levels of PFAS pollution, and those are the communities marked in the darkest blue-green. 80% of the top public water systems with the highest levels of PFAS, let that sink in for a minute, 80% of the top public water systems with the highest level of PFAS, from 227.8 ppt to 1,380.1 ppt, are considered more disadvantaged than the average California community, adding to their pre-existing environmental burdens. PFAS testing data are available for 77% of these disadvantaged communities. 69% have had PFAS detected in their water system. At least 20% of these tested communities have the highest levels of PFAS detections, that is in the top quartile, compounding the very high burdens they already face. And then one note here on this slide. If you see these highlighted numbers, these reflect water systems that have higher than average indicators of environmental distress or socioeconomic distress that are higher than anywhere else in the state, higher than average in the state of California. So for example, if you look at this first entry right here, which is the city of Fresno, its water system had a total maximum PFAS concentration of 1,380.1 parts per trillion. 66.3% of the residents served by this water system are people of color, 66.3, which is above the state average. 25.5% have less than a high school education, greater than state average. 13.8% are unemployed, higher than the state average. 52.6% are below the poverty line, above the state average. 20.5% have a disproportionate housing burden, above the state average. The highest state Cal EnviroScreen score in the state, 45.8. This report, again released in 2021, was updated in 2024. And now what they documented, what the report documents, is that PFAS has been found in water systems serving up to 25.4 million Californians, approximately 64% of the population. 8.9 million Californians living in state-identified disadvantaged communities are being served by water systems that have or have had PFAS contamination. That's 79%. And finally, 2.3 million Californians living in these communities face or have faced the highest level of PFAS contamination, which again is the top quartile. A few slides ago, I sang the praises of a health study that was released by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. It came out in May of last year. That says Mary. We'll correct that in the version that gets circulated to the group, May 15th, 2023. Sociodemographic factors are associated with the abundance of PFAS sources and detection in U.S. community water systems, published in the Environmental Science and Technology Journal. People who live in communities with higher proportions of Black and Hispanic Latino residents are more likely to be exposed to harmful levels of PFAS in their water supplies than people living in other communities. Researchers link this finding to the disproportionate siting of sources of PFAS, such as major manufacturers, airports, military bases, wastewater treatment plants, and landfills near watersheds serving these communities. No surprise. But this is the first peer-reviewed study to show socio-demographic disparities in drinking water, and to statistically link sources such as landfills and airports to PFAS concentrations in community water systems over broad geographic scales. This is the type of document that I believe we can use in Florida to bring to the FDOH's attention and to FDEP's attention, and have what we'll talk about in short order, a generally anodyne action plan revised to incorporate an environmental justice component. The researchers, as part of this study, used PFAS monitoring data from over 7,800 U.S. community water systems in the 18 states in which such data is widespread. You'll note that Florida is not one of them. This analysis included over 44,000 samples collected between 2016 and 2022. They also looked at geographic locations of PFAS sources from multiple databases. And again, the study found that PFAS detection was positively associated with the number of PFAS sources and proportions of people of color who are served by a water system. Each additional industrial facility, military fire training area, and airport in a community water system's watershed was associated with between a 10% increase and a 108% increase in PFOA and a 20% to 34% increase in PFOS in drinking water. In April of 2024, yet another depressing study, public health study, but a call to action nonetheless. This was published by the American Chemical Society. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but it's important. PFAS-contaminated pesticides applied near public supply wells disproportionately impact communities of color in California. We can see who's getting the short end of the stick. It's a story that's repeated over and over again and now documented by objective evidence and data from coast to coast. We're talking about the West Coast. We're going to go to the Pacific Northwest and the Heartland, and then our next presenter will talk about what's being seen in New York. So that's the problem. That's what we're faced with, and some of the scary public health implications. We talked about the epidemiological data, the toxicological studies. I now want to move into solutions. There are a number of states that our research reflected that have looked at addressing not just PFAS generally, but PFAS from an environmental justice perspective. There are two in particular that I want to bring to your attention as a way of perhaps patterning what they've done here in Florida, or if you come from another state, in your own state. I'm going to go through one in some detail, and the other I'm just going to tip my hat towards. And the latter being this first one, Minnesota created or issued back in 2021, February of 2021, its PFAS blueprint. Environmental justice is all over this document. It's mentioned over 25 times. I've pulled out a number of their findings here. I'm not going to go through them in the interest of time, but it's definitely worth a read. I will provide one quote that I found interesting and important and relevant. Outside of the federally mandated monitoring for PFAS in community water systems, Minnesota Department of Health is taking on several additional public water system monitoring efforts. Some efforts aim to explore whether there is an impact to drinking water in known areas of concern. These projects target monitoring at systems with higher risk for PFAS based on the location of known PFAS sources and the vulnerability to contamination of the aquifers sourcing the drinking water. Prioritizing monitoring in these areas also helps to protect areas of potential concern for environmental justice or health inequities, including communities of color and small rural communities. So they recognize there's a problem, it's documented, and they have a plan moving forward. Of all of the action plans that I reviewed at the state level, I was most impressed with the action plan published by the Washington Department of Ecology. This one was originally issued in 2021, which I guess was a good year for issuing action plans. Florida's action plan was also issued in 2021, but this one was revised in 2022. There are a number of findings that are made that track the various reports that I went through from NRDC, from the Silent Spring Institute, from the T.H. Chen Department of Health at Harvard. I want to get right into, though, the recommendations because I think they're interesting and they help to set a path for Florida. Picking up, for those who are here, right about here. DOE, which is the Department of Ecology, recognizes that communities more exposed to toxic chemicals are not often the same communities with expendable resources to get involved with chemical action plans or with environmental policy in general. They don't have the same resources, they don't have the money, they don't have access to experts. As a result of these considerations, DOE incorporated health equity and EJ elements into the PFAS Chemical Action Plan recommendations. And I've pulled out just a few which I think are important. Mitigation planning should aim to minimize cost burdens for lower income and overburdened communities who are less able to absorb ratepayer cost increases. Second recommendation, determine whether vulnerable or overburdened populations may be impacted as a result of PFAS contamination when response resources are prioritized. Next recommendation, effective communication channels should engage and inform the communities who benefit from tailored outreach. Rely on local community resources to perform effective and equitable outreach to typically underserved populations. Funding should be included to compensate expert stakeholders for their time and input, and to cover expenditures for items such as food, childcare, translation, and interpretation and transportation services. Just a quick side note to get to the thesis that I'm going to be presenting in short order about redevelopment as an important leg of the state's response to the PFAS crisis in EJ communities. It's unlikely that any time in the near future the legislature will allocate money for this type of specific outreach to EJ communities and fund experts, toxicologists, and the like for EJ communities, but the private sector can do that. The private sector is flexible, it's nimble, and heavily capitalized, and when incentivized properly, it can move quickly. So there's a role here for the private sector to play, which we're going to talk about in a second. And then finally, we haven't discussed over the past 4 years as part of this conference PFAS in consumer products. But it's an issue that needs to be addressed. It's certainly an issue from an environmental justice perspective. Certain communities, certain EJ communities use PFAS products differently. I'm right down here. The recommendation is to identify those products which might be disproportionately exposing overburdened communities. And finally, in addition to involving historically overburdened and underserved communities in response to drinking water contamination, DOE intends to gather input from these communities to address PFAS in products and empower people with information to purchase safer products. Let's talk about, briefly, what's going on at the federal level. In 2020, EPA released its PFAS Strategic Roadmap, which they called EPA's Commitment to Action 2021 to 2024. They built their action plan on a three-legged stool. Research, restrict, and remediate. Research, restrict, and remediate. I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points. You can read them on the screen. They'll be in the materials. But I do want to point out that, and this is a little difficult to read, even in my notes, what I tried to do, the EP action plan is divided into several different sections with the headers that I have up on the screen here at the major bullet items. Making PFAS use safer, holding polluters accountable, protecting America's drinking water, identifying the scale of exposure through drinking water, deploying funding to invest in infrastructure projects to address PFAS in water, incorporating equity and environmental justice into EPA actions, and listening to and learning from communities. The sub-bullets that I've highlighted in red reflect, in my view, the specific actions that EPA is taking under the action plan to address environmental justice, the challenge of PFAS in EJ communities. So I commend those to your reading after the conference. And what's also interesting, I pulled out this sidebar, EPA's analytic tools that it brings to bear when looking at PFAS generally, as well as PFAS in drinking water and surface water in overburdened communities. The National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, NEJAC, has reviewed recently EPA's action plan and has provided some recommendations on how to improve EPA's approach to environmental justice in the PFAS context. What you'll see on this screen, on this slide, is that I have again brought forward the three pillars, the three legs of EPA's action plan stool, PFAS action plan stool. And I did that because in my view and in my experience, there's a fourth leg here that's missing, and that is redevelop. I had an opportunity to actually provide testimony to the U.S. Senate on pending PFAS legislation, and that took place last year. And I made my concern known about what I felt was this missing opportunity, and that EPA should think about expanding the approach that it's taken to bring private sector capital off the sidelines. And I put my remarks, which were very lengthy, in correspondence dated July 3rd, 2023, the cover page of which I have up on the screen here, and I just want to read you one passage from that letter. We think that the committee's draft legislation presents a timely opportunity to direct EPA to expand its approach by adding a fourth goal, redevelop. Objectives within this goal could consist of engaging brownfield stakeholders on redevelopment-focused enforcement discretion policies, brownfield planning, assessment, remediation, and job creation and training grants specifically targeting PFAS-impaired sites, administrative initiatives that further defer federal enforcement authority to state environmental officials and local delegated pollution control programs, where responsible parties have entered into a binding, enforceable, voluntary cleanup agreement, as well as cross-agency collaboration to encourage other federal brownfield partners to allocate human and financial resources to support cleanup and redevelopment of PFAS-impacted sites. For those of you on the private sector side who are looking for resources, federal resources, to help your client put its shoulder to the wheel, the Department of Defense has billions of dollars to address this issue, and they too have, as part of the whole of government approach, which I mentioned at the top of my remarks, a very active environmental justice initiative, which I believe can be used to leverage funding for sites that may be owned by local governments or orphan sites in EJ communities. One last federal note before we land this plane, for those who are involved in especially challenging PFAS situations. Last month, EPA released the report that I have up on the screen. This is fairly brand new. This is called the Fiscal 2023 Environmental Collaboration and Conflict Resolution Report. The report highlights EPA's key achievements in providing environmental collaboration and conflict resolution in fiscal year 2023 and the infrastructure that supports this work. EPA's Conflict Prevention and Resolution Center provides facilitators and mediators who help address some of its most challenging cases, including PFAS. The center is part of EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights and supports the entire agency by helping any program or regional office to prevent and resolve environmental disputes anywhere in the country, anywhere, coast to coast, top to bottom. Last year, ECCR specialists from Region 1 provided support to the fall 2022 Tribal Leaders Summit and Environmental Conference hosted by the Passamaquoddy tribe. Did I pronounce that correct? Close? I'll take that as a yes. At Pleasant Point, and guided participants through sensitive discussions on ecological concerns of indigenous cultural significance, including bioremediation of PFAS compounds on tribal lands. I had never heard of this division within EPA before I prepared for this presentation, but it seems like they have tremendous resources to bring to bear, human and otherwise, for especially daunting sites in overburdened communities of color. Okay, where does all of this lead us to in Florida? What I'd like to propose is our own action plan, our PFAS 4 conference action plan for Florida, PFAS action plan for Florida. And these are a series of recommendations to get the dialogue started, and my hope is that we will create an affinity group through LinkedIn or otherwise after this conference where we can continue to dialogue and maybe bring some of these ideas forward to the governor's office, to the Department of Environmental Protection, to the Department of Health, and to communities across the state that can otherwise benefit. I'll go through these really quickly. First, I think we need to convene, much like years ago we had a governor's commission on environmental equity and justice, a governor's coordinated task force on PFAS and EJ communities consisting of DEP, DOH, the Water Management District, EPA Region 4, tribal governments and stakeholders from the private sector, local governments, NGOs, and EJ organizations. Next, we need to update the DEP's February 2021 PFAS action plan, and we need to add a section to create a strategy for Florida's environmental justice communities. I'm going to get to that in a second. And as I mentioned about 45 minutes ago, the current version of DEP's PFAS action plan doesn't mention environmental justice even once. There should be a statewide information portal maintained by the Department of Health, in my view, to provide greater transparency to all of the available PFAS data statewide. There's something called a Superfund Memorandum of Agreement out there. It needs to be amended, it's with DEP, to provide for use of EPA administrative discretion to forego enforcement of federal corrective action authority where a party has entered into a voluntary cleanup agreement with the state or a delegated local pollution control program under either the state's dry cleaning contamination cleanup program or the Florida Brownfields program. This is hugely important. I don't know how many lawyers we have in the audience here or those who work with the Florida Brownfields program generally, but if you have a site that's under federal enforcement, like a number of these PFAS sites will be, when the CERCLA hazardous listing becomes final, there will be an inability to get these sites into the Florida Brownfields program, which means no economic incentives, no liability protection, and it's going to make it harder for our good friend Edwin to underwrite these sites. There's a little tweak in the statute, for those who are taking notes, it's 376.82, that says, so long as the feds forego enforcement authority to DEP, all is well and good, you're forgiven, you can get into the Brownfields program. So we need that Superfund Memorandum of Agreement revised. It sounds dry, it sounds very legal-esque, but it's critically important. Similarly, we need to roll forward or eliminate the threshold eligibility date for participation in Florida Brownfields program for all municipal entities, all local governments, as well as all passive receivers. The concept of passive receiver is something we're going to get into in great detail later in this conference and especially on the third day. But here's the issue. When the Brownfield statute was enacted in 1997, the legislature established an artificial cutoff date, the date of enactment of the statute, July 1, 1997. And what they said is anything that happened before applicant to the program that you did or contributed to, you're forgiven. Don't do anything after July 1, 1997. Because if you do anything after July 1, 1997, you can't get into the program. Well, we know that the vintage of these PFAS discharges is very recent and, in fact, may still be ongoing. So we need to eliminate that threshold completely because local governments have lots of PFAS-impacted sites that can and should be brought forward for redevelopment and for infusions of private sector capital. And then, in that same vein, the state needs to enact a number of standalone financial incentives for parties that voluntarily remediate, that is, who undertake site rehabilitation of PFAS in EJ communities and improve drinking water infrastructure in EJ communities. I'm not going to go through what all of those are, but they're here on the screen, and they're all important and needed and brilliant. But what I do want to do is I want to close with some specific recommendations to update the state's PFAS action plan and to add a section to create a strategy for Florida's environmental justice communities. Most of these have been taken from the Washington State Department of Ecology Action Plan, so I want to give credit where credit is due. And oh, by the way, well, that's not good. This sidebar here, this is the table of contents for the state's action plan, which again was issued in March of 2022. And what you won't see is any use of the word environmental justice. So, what can and what should we add? Effective communication channels should engage and inform the communities who benefit from tailored outreach. We need to rely on local community resources to perform effective and equitable outreach to typically underserved populations. Funding should be included to compensate expert stakeholders for their time and input and to cover expenditures for items such as food, childcare, translation and interpretation, and transportation services. Involving overburdened communities requires removing barriers to participation unique to these communities, so we need to find out what those barriers are and we need to remove them. PFAS contamination resulting from the use of AFFF can result in additional health and environmental burdens in communities with cumulative impacts, health disparities, and EJ considerations that we all know. Such communities should be prioritized when PFAS containing AFFF is quantified, disposed, or replaced to cut off the exposure. Certain communities use products differently. Commercial products, we need to identify what those products are in EJ communities to reduce the disproportionate exposure. And finally, in addition to involving historically overburdened and underserved communities in response to drinking water contamination, this says DOE, but FDEP needs to gather input from these communities to address PFAS in products and empower people with information to purchase safer products and make better decisions. That is a lot of information. I hope it was well received. Where, again, I would like to bring all of this is into a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue over the next 12 months so that we can bring a consensus action plan, a better action plan to DEP and our overburdened communities across the state, of which we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, can benefit. That's the take from the 40,000-foot level, the federal level. That's the take from some of the states across the country and what I think we need to do here in Florida. I now want to turn it over to my colleague from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation to give us a New York perspective, and then we're going to wrap up with Edwin and take questions. I spoke for a considerable amount of time, but it's a long session, so we're going to leave you with plenty of time for dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
No. we need, that's the last presentation. We need Dr. Iwashita's presentation, please. There we go.
All right, so I ended up sending this presentation kind of a last minute, so I don't actually intend this to be more a presentation, but more of a conversation starter, because given the limitation of time, I actually had to eliminate some of the slides and keep it more succinct and compact for this conversation here. The main author of this work is my student from Cornell University that I'm co-advising with Dr. Alistair Hayden. She's currently funded with a small grant to cover for her work. Nia Clements, she's very hardworking, intelligent student from the Department of Public and Ecosystem Health. Okay, so the full work was submitted already for publication. So we have our fingers crossed that you have access to the full story there. In addition to that, I want to say that this work was conducted with public available data, so if, in terms of let's say, and therefore, I probably should say like a small disclaimer, this presentation is academic and does not reflect the position of the state of New York, right? Okay. So some of these numbers, they are evolving, they are being updated quite constantly, but when you consider studies from the USGS and EPA, we have in the ballpark that the drinking water of 200 million people across from the United States they have PFAS that exceeds the EPA recommended guidance level, right? Oh, and as was very eloquently explained before, there are disparities that you frequently correlate with social demographic variables, indicators, right? Okay. So the idea behind this work was to actually support and our agency understanding of what was happening across the states and what steps are necessary for us to start addressing some of these issues, right? So for starters, are New York State communities equally sampled? Is PFAS exposure equitably distributed? Do we need to change our sampling strategies? So the work was carried out with a data set, UCMR5, EPA's UCMR5. So EPA has been collecting and sampling public water systems across the country, right? I'm guessing most people here are familiar with it. And it's ongoing, but the objective is to pretty much sample over 10,000 large public water suppliers. Really pretty good number for medium size, but when it comes to small public water systems, only a sample, a subset of all the existing PWS are going to be sampled and analyzed for PFAS. And that's what actually one of the reasons that drove us to look into this data. Okay. So far only 7% was collected. Actually, I think another batch just came out. Oops. I think a couple months ago. Right. So, and the other part of the data set is another recently released data set, is the official map for disadvantaged communities for the New York State. That's going to be utilized for to providing criteria for permits for renewable energy resource projects, for instance. Okay, so was adopted in March 2023, and here just a small breakdown of the numbers, and the disadvantaged community map. It's based on, I think, 45 component variables that includes ethnicity, income, education, but also proximity to remediation facilities, air quality monitoring levels. So, and a committee led by NYSERDA in New York State and chaired by our Director of Environmental Justice, worked on developing this index that is composed of 45 variables. Okay, and it's based on census tracts as a spatial unit. Okay, hang on, just a little bit of breaking down some of the numbers. Okay, and hang on. And then we used univariate logistic regression for all the 45 variables. So we could use the odds ratio to see the likelihood of a specific one of the components being a factor in determining the exposure to PFAS. Okay. All right. So this is the map here, New York State. In blue, we have the results. These are the results of the UCMR5 for PFAS already. The disadvantaged community designation areas are in black. And then you have in red PFAS above basically the reportable limit and non-detects, right? Right off the bat, you can see that it's most of the samples, they are actually along this axis here, where you have Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, then Albany, and of course here the Hudson Valley, and then New York and Long Island. And part of that is because the UCMR5 is focusing on large public water systems, right? And which leaves gaps in rural areas. So you don't have just a problem there then of ethnicity or income, but essentially rural communities, which also include several tribal territories. Okay. One of the then findings of this work is that the current UCMR5 sampling framework will not capture equally the rural communities and potential environmental justice areas. And to demonstrate, and that would make it harder to perform any spatial analysis to actually study and demonstrate that these populations are being disproportionately burdened. So a proper sampling framework it is going to be crucial for us to actually to demonstrate and show that, to develop policies to cope with this issue. Okay. Okay. So suburban rural areas, which are also more likely to have like a small public water systems, right? Public water systems. And a little side note here that also leads to the issue of private wells in rural areas with septic systems. You mentioned the issue of PFAS in consumer products. In New York State, the distance from minimum distance from septic systems to drinking water, a private well for drinking water purposes, is basically determined by county, at a county level. And this distance is basically designed to prevent coliforms and other organics to reach the drinking water supply, right? But PFAS, that's a problem. And if you have PFAS in consumer products, you end up having PFAS in your septic systems. Okay, so that's a story for another day. But when looking from the public water supply side, they are also going to be more common in rural or small communities and towns. Okay, so a little bit of numbers here. Estimated that 66 million people in US and 3.5 million people in New York State will lack measurement of PFAS under this current framework. Okay. And to wrap it up, can easily apply to future UCMR 5, and the idea of this fairly straightforward methodology is that it can be rapidly applied and updated with new data that are being collected through this program. Okay, so and also I invite them to that it could be also applied here in Florida because it's a nationwide effort, and the potential environmental justice areas, they can be derived and calculated from census data and other fairly easy other sociodemographic variables that can be found publicly. Okay, so and the new drinking water sampling strategies are needed both for rural and suburban drinking water supplies. Okay, and environmental justice priority communities, which also I hope that it would also lead to a specific program dedicated to tribal lands, separated from environmental justice. Okay, that's it.
Before you step down, Dr. Iwashita, I want to ask you a question. We're going to defer questions generally to the end, but I want to invoke moderator's privilege because as I'm listening to your discussion and the phenomenal work that you and your colleagues and your students have done in New York, I'm wondering whether this information yet has been widely disseminated, and if so, two things. Number one, I know that there are a number of highly developed and active, vocal and visible environmental justice organizations in New York State. Have they provided any input with respect to this study, either during or after? That's number one. And number two, has this study started to drive policy at the state level yet?
So, oops. Okay. Yes, indeed, there are many environmental justice organizations in New York State. But as you probably are unfortunately familiar with, is that PFAS environmental justice is still emerging. It's still in its infancy. People are starting to look into it, but policy-wise, and even reach out to communities from institutional point of view, is still lacking. As for this work, the idea behind this work was, okay, we have this map that has just been released. We have UCMR5 that it's also, let's say, really fresh data. We want to make propose a methodology to quickly analyze that and send out these results for publication, so we can actually use a proof of concept to hopefully lead to some change in the EPA's framework. So at that moment, we did not consult with organizations. That being said, we do intend to start working with with these organizations through grants, and that are gonna be available through state budget and also federal through EPA's budget too. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll bring Dr. Iwashita back when we open the panel up to questions and dialogue. I would like to ask my good friend Edwin Baez to come to the microphone. This may seem like a discordant shift tonally, but it's not. As I explained in my remarks, environmental insurance is a bridging component that I think needs to or will play a role between the gap and deficit in resources that currently exists at the government level to address this crisis is there, but it's now there's an emergent understanding of just how deeply set that crisis is in EJ communities, bridging the gap in government resources with the availability of resources that exist in the private sector. And what are the vehicles that we can use, the little carts that we can bring to the playing board to have the private capital employed for purposes of remediation and redevelopment and job creation and all of those wonderful things that happen with environmental redevelopment. And one of the main vehicles is, of course, environmental insurance. And I'm keenly interested in hearing what 12 months has revealed to us and revealed to Beazley in terms of not just how it approaches risk and underwrites risk, but what happens when the rubber meets the road, when claims start to be asserted, and are in fact claims being asserted? Or are we, from a transactional perspective, getting worked up more so than we need to be? All yours, Edwin.
Great. My name is Edwin Baez. I've been in the environmental insurance business for 24 years, right out of college. I've spent most of my career in New York and moved to Florida 11 years ago and working here on environmental insurance projects during that time. It's been great time to see the development, especially of southern Florida, with so much new construction, residential warehouses, and to be a part of that, that's been great. I guess I'll talk a little bit about little bit about Beazley Insurance. We're a specialty insurance, so we're not, we're not doing construction, we're not doing auto, we're not doing, your traditional all-state insurance. This is specialty insurance. So we have stuff like cyber, life medicine, or what's it called, biotech, and environmental is part of that. So it's kind of like you're a very specialty insurer. We're publicly traded on the London Stock Exchange. That's our symbol. Last year we wrote $6 billion in gross written premium. We're an A-rated carrier, which is important when you're doing, in the lines of not being your traditional insurance. We don't do annual policies typically. Our policies can go out to 10 years. So you can imagine being able to, we're providing contracts out there that are going to be with you or the client for 10 years. So your financial strength is important, and we're one of the strongest. A little bit about our team. There's 20 of us across the world, theoretically, because we have people in London, we have people in Canada as well. But all of us have at least 15 years of underwriting experience. So we kind of, the Beazley motto is, let's hire experienced people who've worked in the environmental sector for a significant amount of time, been underwriting for a significant amount of time, and let them do what they do and take on kind of the more challenging risk. That's kind of what we're known for in the marketplace. All we do is kind of fix site pollution. We don't do this. Theoretically, you can argue there's 20 or 30 carriers in the marketplace, but when you break it down to what their specialty is, we're one of the few that actually does fixed site, and that's all we do. Other carriers, for example, will do environmental services, which means environmental casualty for environmental remediation firms and contractors. We don't play in that space. Our bread and butter and what we do is fixed site pollution. We're one of the few carriers too that can put up $25 million on a risk, and we can do that for a 10-year period. Again, very specialty. You don't see that very often, and we're one of the few carriers that can put up that capacity on a risk that we like. So our standard form is called Eclipse. It's kind of our policy form. It's, again, for 6 fixed site exposures. It covers cleanup costs, third-party bodily injury, and third-party property damage. Our form kind of follows the EPA kind of thought process of cradle to grave. So not only is it fixed site, the exposure on the site, but also transportation, and then disposal, non-owned disposal sites. In that coverage as well, you have business interruption. So if the pollution condition, you have a release and that causes you to shut down your operation, that's covered under a form. It also has natural resource damage. So if you have a release that impacts third-party natural resource damage, that's covered under a form. We also have other nuances there with regards to mold, Legionella, asbestos, lead-based paint. Those are things that we also can cover under our form. Who buys this? And really for our purposes, predominantly property developers are a big one. Mergers and acquisition clients are going to buy a company and they're scared about the potential liability, so they get us involved to kind of fill that gap. Property developers are going to break ground and they want to make sure that if they find something they weren't expecting, they want coverage for that. Property owners, leasers, sellers, or transactions are big ones where basically you got a buyer and a seller and they want to pass on that environmental liability to a policy. Those are people that contact us regularly for this coverage. And a lot of it is driven by lenders. So kind of what Michael was saying, you're a lender, you like this transaction, you want to participate, you want to provide the funding, but you're scared or concerned about what potentially might be found or liability in the past. So, this policy is a good way to kind of protect everyone under it. PFAS. PFAS has been a challenge, no question. Every single account that reaches my desk, the first thing I'm thinking about is PFAS. And I have a few other enemies in the back as well, but PFAS right now is at the forefront. And the challenge, the biggest challenge is PFAS, because I've been around when we had MTBE was a concern, I've been around when mold was a concern. And so the biggest challenge here is the different industries. How many different industries does it touch? And this gives you, these are all pretty broad. And so we're always thinking about what's the PFAS exposure on this risk when it hits our desk. Some of the challenges, from the industry, we didn't know it existed. 10 years ago, we didn't know what PFAS was. And so now it's at a forefront. And like I said, we write policies for 10-year terms. So, that's a concern to us. So, and some of our colleagues, my colleagues, have been a little bit sucker punched by that. Came, with something, you underwrote something that you didn't expect. The other challenge is that no low or changing standards, and states are being conservative. I think I spoke about last year how we had a site in New Jersey where we were close to closure, and right towards the end, the LSRP said, clean this, we want you to test for PFAS. And of course, they found it, and then the negotiation took place about cleaning it up. And the state of New Jersey was not very amicable about it. They basically said, despite the fact that's an industrial area and a warehouse, we want you to clean it up to zero. And we had to fit that bill. So, every state seems to be doing different things when it comes to PFAS. And so we're having to adjust and learn. State programs are requiring testing. For example, I've seen, and it's a wild gambit. In California, for example, I've seen recently where the regulators will say, this industry is not associated with PFAS use, so no further work is needed. But I've seen states in, like New York, for example, the environmental brownfield program, where every single site has to be tested for PFAS. And ISRA in Jersey has been, depending on who you have, but predominantly it's more like California, where it doesn't have a history of it, but if potentially it does, we want you to test. So, all the programs now are requiring that testing to take place. And more and more we're seeing is the government knocking on the door, which is not very common either, because they found it down source at a drinking water well, or it's impacting the waste treatment center. So they're knocking on the doors of our insureds, and we're having to respond to that. Some of the positives. We've been underwriting PFAS for it says there 4 or 5 years, but I want to feel like it's longer. So we're definitely not getting sucker punched. We have a pretty good idea of the industries involved and what we need to do and the questions we need to ask to kind of get our hands around the risk. And that might mean having a lower limit, higher deductible, shorter term, to satisfy the client, but also protect ourselves. One of the other positives that, with regards to PFAS, overall, one of our biggest concerns is chlorinated solvents, and because it creates a vapor intrusion issue at adjacent sites. We have a pretty, when it comes to remediation, we have a pretty good number. We can, coming up with a remediation cost is usually a lot easier than putting a number on liability. And if someone were to sue you because they have cancer now because they were exposed to chlorinated solvents downstream. So with regards to PFAS, that's not as big of a concern as other things. Remediation technology seems to be getting better. I think last year we had here the PFAS annihilator. So it was good to see that the technology is advancing to help us eradicate the issue or address the issue. And we're also seeing in some states there being some logical steps being taken to thought with regards to cleanup. If the site's in a industrial area surrounded by other industrial sites, do we really, and another contamination exists, do we really need to go in there and clean up the PFAS? It's not a threat to human health. So we're seeing some states, more and more states, hopefully, kind of use that thought process. You've seen a lot of the action in the media, the thoughts in the media has been about the protection of groundwater, the protection of drinking water. And a lot of the things we look at are in areas that don't have potable wells, are not areas where there's drinking water. And so we hope that kind of common sense prevails, and that allows us to write business and facilitate transactions. So I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Edwin. Hello? 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 No? No good. Okay.
Edwin, thank you. Doctor, thank you. It's time to move to the questions and answers and dialogue portion of the panel. I promised you we would have a lot of time for that. We do. We have about 35 minutes. The panel concludes at 5:30. A tremendous debt of gratitude to these two gentlemen to my right. I literally roped them in at the last minute, and the presentation and the panel was all the better for it, and the conversation that we're about to have will be all the better for it. Do we have our IT, do we have someone who's going to walk around with a microphone? Gene, are you out there? Okay, very good. I want to frame this part of the conversation before we go into some personal remarks.
I need to zoom out.
And I think it may just because I've been getting very emotional as I get older. I called my wife from the plane, and I told her that I must have cried 3 or 4 times watching this silly romantic comedy on Netflix, Anyone But You, just a really silly movie. I say that because this practice, as much as I love it, it breaks my heart sometimes, and I'm sure it does yours too. You spend enough time in this arena and in these very dirty trenches, and you get a sense for just how many innovative ways people can screw up this planet and hurt people either intentionally or unintentionally. We at our firm, and I'm sure many of you, have a lot of experience in redeveloping agricultural sites in Florida. That is a real double-edged sword, isn't it? Right? It's a lot of work for those of us in the private sector. Gets the bills paid, but at the same time we're taking a lot of ag land out of production. Jobs are going away. Open space is going away. It's a problem. There's a benefit, there's a problem. More housing, which is wonderful, but we're losing important, vital ag land. All of this is context for what I'm about to say. And it's the reason why I asked Gene to allow us to speak to, for the first time ever, environmental justice in a PFAS context. And to Gene's great credit, I knew he would say yes, but he did. My concern, and I have to believe it's shared by many in this room, is that it looks like we may be creating 2 classes of PFAS impacted parties, 2 types of communities. Those with resources and voice, who have access to all of us, and debt and equity, and walk the halls of power, and those who don't, right? The voiceless, the powerless, those without any resources. Who speaks for them? You look at the state's PFAS action plan, and it sends a message to those communities here in Florida. You compare it to the action plan in Washington State, which we reviewed, to Minnesota, which we sort of reviewed, to the federal action plan. You look at what New York State is doing, and all of that wonderful work where they've actually mapped out sites that have this disproportionate burden. Their Disadvantaged Communities Index. In California, you have the Cal score for disadvantaged communities. So you're not flying blind. You know which resources, which communities are screaming for help and what specific help they need and why. We don't have that in Florida. So again, it's my hope that this serves as, this panel and these remarks serve as a call to action, and that collectively we can figure out a better way to do that here. Now, having said that, I would like to open the panel up to everyone that I'm looking at and take questions, comments, observations.
Hello? Okay. So I have a two-part question, so bear with me. I'm going to give a little bit of context. My name is Sergio. I work as an electrical engineer working from the grid. A lot of electrical equipment uses a specific gas called sulfur hexafluoride. It's a gas that's very bad for the environment if it ever gets leaked. And a big push within the industry right now is to switch from sulfur hexafluoride to PFAS gas, right? So my question is, because I was hearing multiple things from the panels, but it seemed that does PFAS gas, because I know you mentioned it in your presentation, the gas level of it, does it have the same type of environmental and health risk as, let's say, if it gets contaminated in the drinking water as well? And then also, secondly as well, when it comes to both either state regulations or federal regulations, is there a big push to kind of either restrict it or stop it in any way? For example, with the current gas that's being used within grid technology, states like California and Maine, they're like, we're going to ban it by 2040. I don't know if there's a huge push to do that with PFAS as well, or if the research is too new to have that sort of talk within the federal or state level as of yet.
Would you like to speak to that?
Okay. Hello? Did I turn it off? Okay. Regarding your first question about the substance, we know that there are thousands of PFAS out there, so I can't really talk about the specifics of the substance that you're mentioning, but I mean, if you we can discuss later. You can give me the case number, and I can look it up in the database and see what type of information we might have about it. Okay. And could you repeat your second question?
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, my second question was that I saw through all three presentations, there were some states that the data was showing that was a little bit too new. The research was a little too new to make these kind of state or federal regulations, but I also saw some other states that from either the federal level or more of the state level that they were kind of pushing really hard to make sure that PFAS wasn't getting out there, that we're trying to restrict it a little bit more, checking if it's out there. I'm just wondering if it's too new to do anything about it as of yet. We don't know for certain what the data shows, or if it's more of like, no, we kind of see what PFAS is on the federal and state level. We kind of want to stop the sale of that.
Specifically about environmental justice policies?
Sure.
Or in general?
Just in general.
As we mentioned in this panel, like it varies a lot from state to state, and also varies from the focus of what each state is looking into. Michigan and Minnesota, they are taking big steps in developing like a pathway to address PFAS. California, Washington State, and Maine. The issue in Maine is biosolids and land application. That's one of the, let's say, the big headache that they have right now is and how it's affecting local farmers, their organic produce, milk industry, right? And as for, and I was thinking when you were mentioning about, both of you mentioning about the, both the insurance part and the cost and access, that PFAS, environmental justice, they need to actually to work together also with language access, right? Because when it comes to, for instance, fish advisories, there was a recent paper published in 2023 where they interview anglers in the Hudson River, asking about if they were aware of the fish advisory, and they analyzed dividing by ethnicity and first language, and there was a disparity of people of color that were less aware of fish advisories. So even if we do all the technical work, the policies, and we put out there the fact sheets, for instance, if we do not have language access, our work is basically still like a half there.
EPA is actually very good at language access. I've seen numerous guidance documents, regulatory and health-based, that are published in multiple languages. Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, Vietnamese, I could go on.
Yep.
We'll make, in fact, what we'll do is, as a follow-up in the materials, we'll add some of those alternate language guidance documents so that folks in the arena or who are otherwise interested can use those templates as a model. Thank you for your question. You may want to bring it back to some of the more technical presenters over the next few days. Other questions? Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for not being here earlier, but I'm going to respond to what you pointed out about environmental justice concerns here in Florida. So recently we had a hit around the construction demolition landfill at 70 nanograms per liter. We have water wells. We have about 140,000 people in Lee County on domestic self-supply wells. And I know that our county is being very proactive to get out in front of groundwater testing on the public supply. And I'm just wondering if you had covered earlier some of the environmental justice concerns for the Lehigh Acres, for instance, is a predominantly immigrant community in Lee County. There's also a number of folks living out, outside of the municipalities that have domestic self-supply. So if you could just speak to how those folks are going to be able to get their groundwater tested to address their having a safe supply of water with the upcoming drinking water standards, that would be most appreciated.
Well, first of all, thank you for your comment. It proves the thesis that we've spent some time talking about in the first hour of the panel, which is we're flying blind in Florida. There isn't a plan in place to respond to those concerns, to identify impacted communities and bring the necessary resources. It just simply doesn't exist in any coordinated way. And I'm hopeful that we can, as a community, through this conference, develop a series of recommendations and action items that we can bring forward to the state, to the Department of Environmental Protection, to the Department of Health, to the media, to affected stakeholders, so that we have a substantive response to your question. and help for those who need it.
It's not actually a question, but just kind of feeding off of what you said. EPA did kind of address that with the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation. When that got released, they co-released additional funding under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that is targeted towards EJ communities, particularly private wells are eligible for it. So it's not far enough, but it's a step in the right direction.
And that bipartisan infrastructure law came out in part of the latter two of those three executive orders that I mentioned, and it's also reflected in some of those EPA strategic guidance documents that were also reflected in the resources. I'm glad you brought that up.
Forgive me for my ignorance, but this, the EPA grant, the states needs to apply for it, right? So in this case, the Department of Environmental Protection will have to apply for it to get the...
There are, a majority of the funding is through states and local governments under states, but not-for-profits can also apply. Yes.
Hi, this question is for the Underwriter representative from Beazley. I believe it's Edwin, is that correct? What kind of testing is necessary for some of these land transactions? Is there certain kind of PFAS that are more problematic? Is it difficulty to data that is an issue for some of these transactions, or is the testing not an issue, or the cost of testing not an issue?
That is a great question, and I want to go you one better, or a friendly amendment, if I may, and that is, what happens if someone gives you a report and it has PFAS data? Will you automatically exclude that site from PFAS coverage? But first, answer the gentleman's questions.
No, I mean, you know,
Edwin.
everything we do is very case-by-case basis, and you'll be surprised the spectrum of information I get on every single transaction. Usually the starting point for us is a phase 1, phase 2, and obviously that doesn't contain PFAS information, or very rarely does it. I'm shocked even when I see a phase 1 that, you know, may mention PFAS. You know, we do our own kind of due diligence of looking at the history at this point, and it's not really that's really a conversation for your environmental consultant and your attorney to decide on whether you want to test for PFAS or not. You know, depending on their history, we can, like I said, we can kind of be creative with regards to a higher deductible, a lower limit, a shorter term, giving bodily injury and property damage, and maybe not cleanup cost. So depending on the information that's available, we try to make the best decision that's for us, but at the same time give the client some value. Regards to your question, with regards to PFAS, it depends on the levels that are presently there. If we feel that that's unlikely for the government to show up or require cleanup based on the surrounding area, the type of use, it's going to remain that way. It's maybe not going to be redeveloped. Then those are all factors where we can, I would say, gamble more than if then we know it's an area that's, you know, there's drinking water wells. We know they're going to make you test further for it, and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's kind of the fun part and the difficult part of my job. It's very case by case, and the information that we have kind of drives my ability to provide coverage.
So that's an important message to get out into the marketplace. What I think I'm hearing you say is the presence of PFAS at a particular site doesn't automatically exclude that site from insurance coverage for PFAS-related claims. Okay, very good.
Got a follow-up.
Sorry, I don't mean to push the point. Just a follow-up question on that. So obviously there's different kind of testing available. EPA has issued, you know, 537.1, 1633 for different types of waters. I'm just curious, would the EPA 6 part of the MCL with the hazard index be most focused, PFOA, PFAS, Gen X, and so forth, be more focused? Are there PFAS that are tested for in some of these transactions, or at least some of these level 1, level 2 site investigations that are ignored versus ones that are more important, like PFOA and PFAS, which have a specific MCL designation of 4 parts per trillion?
For purposes of underwriting.
For purposes of underwriting,
That's a great
yeah.
question. Don't give them any ideas.
Obviously, this if they're violating the standard that's already there, then the other constituents we're not as focused on. But at the same time, if those levels that are set are not being exceeded, then we're not as concerned about the other items.
As a follow-up to the young lady from Lee County, I represent the city of Stewart, and we had actually a portion of our water service area that was unserved at the time, but through DEP and the Department of Health, we were able to get a grant, actually not a grant, it was paid in full, to extend water lines to some 190 properties, and they paid everything, the connection fee, the actual connection to the mobile home, and the water lines. So DEP is a great resource for funding opportunities.
Wait, don't hand off the microphone yet, because you're going to be on our panel next year. Question for you. How was the request made? What was the context made with respect to the request that prompted DEP to say, we like you?
I don't know they said they liked us, but they did say, they did a couple of studies in Stewart and in Martin County as it relates to PFAS. They took samples from numerous wells throughout the county, and as a part of that, the health department actually went out and did the samples. So our approach was, once the study was made available and we recognized there was a hot spot, we talked to DEP through our local officials and were able to get that done. Now, I don't think in Lehigh Acres, for example, they've got that kind of money, but in small pockets that can be done. And those people that live there now have safe drinking water.
It's a great story. And do you know how much, I'm sorry, one more question. I swear this is not a deposition. Do you know how much,
I've been through those, yes.
Do you know how much money, or can you recall how much money the state spent?
About $780,000, as I recall, and that was for the connection fees, of course, and the water lines and the service lines that are run from the main to the mobile home.
Okay. Well, that's a good data point.
Thank you, Dave.
Hi, I have a question about the New York study as far as if any industrial influent sources were looked at rather than just the size of the municipal water supplier.
So the water supplier size was considered by in the EPA planning to sample the and collect the samples, right? As for the DAC index, yes, distance from remediation sites, they were considered in the index.
So remediation sites, but what about industrial influent?
Yes.
Like, so for example, landfill leachate is a huge source of PFAS. Do you have landfill leachate
Landfills
coming
were
into those suppliers?
Yes, so I can't speak to all the 45 variables that were considered, but if my memory doesn't fail me, yes. And manufacturing facilities, industrial sites in general were also considered, and landfills were considered as well, because we know that they are a potential source.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mr. Goldstein, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Rick McCann with WSP. I was project manager a decade ago for the ash remediation project in the city of Jax. And although I walked in about 30 minutes ago, I hear the discussion, and it's mostly about money. How do we avoid the perception of environmental injustice?
Well, I wish you had been here for the first 90 minutes, because we didn't talk about money at all. It was all about environmental justice. So what we'll do is we'll get you the materials, and the presentation has been recorded. You can watch and listen to it.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's a good question. That's why we're here. A lot of people are asking that question.
Yes, sir.
Hey again. During the first presentation, you were talking about the federal roadmap, that it talked about how there's going to be research, restrict, remediate, kind of like the three legs on the stool. I was very curious on the restrict portion of it. I know obviously this could be found online, but I don't know if there was any examples of what the federal government was kind of trying to plan to do when it comes to restricting, to make sure like PFAS is not being contaminated.
That's a 3-day seminar. There are lots of examples.
For sure.
And what we'll do is we'll get you some of the materials where you can spend a lot of time getting up to speed.
All right, appreciate it.
This question's for Edwin. I was curious, you had vapor intrusion as basically not, it appears to be not an issue. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, that's from general discussions that I've read and seen, that PFAS doesn't create a vapor intrusion issues like VOCs or like CVOCs. That's one of the few positives that I've been able to research. But sorry.
Can I interject? Sure. So the ITRC, the Interstate Regulatory, ITRC, you're familiar with ITRC? Yep. They are working on updating their PFAS guidance, and it should include something about vapor intrusion this year. Sorry.
There was actually a vapor intrusion guidance document that was released by EPA last month. They did a comprehensive study at several sites where PFAS was actually manufactured. And they looked at the transition of PFAS from soil and groundwater to vapor. We've discussed that proposal in Florida among a number of our consultants, including one who's sitting in the front row, Vince Urena with Langen. And if memory serves, the answer is unsettled. But what the weight of evidence appears to demonstrate is that even at sites where PFAS was manufactured, the risk of vapor intrusion appears to be low. But the science, as the panelists have pointed out, and as all of us are likely familiar with here in this room, is still emerging. And there's a lot more that we don't know than that we know. I'll also add this. In the last week, ASTM just released a new standard for PFAS indoor air quality and how to properly assess for that. So that suggests that at least someone somewhere is concerned about volatilization of the PFAS, how that happens, and how it should be measured and responded to. We'll make available in the materials that federal study.
Thank you.
Vince, I want to put you on the spot. Do you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. In the back, I think there's one hand raised in the back, and that will be the final question, comment, observation, call to action, all the above.
Just a quick question. Are you familiar with OTM 45 for vapor testing for PFAS?
I am not.
It's an EPA method, but I believe it's pretty new. So I just wanted to know if you knew about it yet. No.
No, I'm not aware of it yet. How new is it?
I'd have to look it up, but it's pretty new.
Okay.
But I know SGS in North Carolina runs it currently, but it's considered an other method by EPA. That's why it's an OTM.
If I may, yeah, I think it has been like released fairly recent. It's I think the period for public comment already closed, and it's pretty official. The use of OTM 45 for including for air emissions, and that could also be used for other air sampling and monitoring. Yeah.
Well, I suspect it'll be discussed in one of the technical presentations over the next 2 days. Something else to track.
Second part, real quick. Second part. I'm sorry. Mixed solid waste incinerators being a source of PFAS aerosolization. Is that not a concern?
One more time.
Mixed solid waste incinerators. So a lot of landfills are burning their waste.
Well, that's a great question.
Is that not a source of possible PFAS releases?
I think we should all be concerned about it. We're looking at a couple of sites now where we're actually opposing new incinerators coming online, and that's definitely an issue that we've been discussing and exploring. There are a number of studies that are out there, scientific peer-reviewed studies, that look at concentrations of PFAS in incinerations, in emissions from incinerators. And then there are also a number of surveys, studies, and I think one of which will be talked about either tomorrow or the day after, which looks at the concentrations of PFAS in concrete and other solid waste debris. Good question. As we wrap up, we're going to give everyone back 3 minutes of their lives. We're going to conclude at 5:27. Thank you for coming. If you have an interest in being part of this ongoing dialogue and interacting with DEP and DOH, please get in touch with me through Gene Jones or directly. Take care, everyone. See you tomorrow.